So this is technically part 3 of this conversation because earlier last week, somebody in the Patreon clued us in that like, hey, this thing that we've been talking about, this wing rack that is not officially announced, is up on Guitar Center's website. And I was like, well, that's weird. So I went ahead and made a video about it. And that video did, I think you would call well. It just hit 200,000 views on Instagram. And it's over, I don't know, probably 50,000 on TikTok. I may be talking out of my face there, but a lot of people saw it and people felt varying ways about it. However, no, I dealt with a lot of interesting comments, none of which were of any merit whatsoever. However, as of today, which is Monday, Behringer has officially announced all of the new wing products. So they've got a new big console. They've got a compact. They basically are taking the wing lineup and mirroring what the X32 lineup was.
Yeah. So to back up, for anyone who's not up to speed here, what we're talking about here is digital mixers.
Yes.
And there are two sizes of ones that are consoles, with physical faders, motorized, faders, that one of which is big enough you'd put in a studio at a desk, and one of which is probably portable. I wouldn't choose to port it, but you could. And then the one that's probably most interesting to all of us is the rack version, which is certainly the spiritual successor of the Behringer X32 that you use.
Yes, which is why I was very interested.
Right, and I'm looking at it in comparison to the Soundcraft UI 24R that I use and love, but I'm not married to. It's a pretty darn compelling device.
Yes, and it seems like the R&D that went into this product really was paying attention to the marketplace and filling gaps that were very glaring, but nobody seemed to be interested in doing anything about.
Okay, so I'm coming into this on the strength of having watched one 4-minute video of a guy walking through the basics of it. So you're way deeper on the details of this thing. So lay it on me. Why might I want to move to it from my Soundcraft?
Well, let's back up a little bit. Let's talk about the reason why the rack mounted mixer is such an appealing option for musicians like us.
Great.
So you kind of clued us in that the form factor is important based on the size.
Yes.
You're talking about carting things and having something that is compact. A lot of people, you talk to sound engineers and they're not wild about it because they like that tactile experience with the faders and the knobs and all that. And I totally understand that. The issue is that in a lot of circumstances, a full-size console is not practical. Some of the times it's not even possible. Considering some of the rooms that we've played, having a legitimate front of house position is not tenable at all.
Right.
So the prevalence of the rack mounted mixer has really blown up in the past few years, primarily for working bands and event bands and that kind of thing, where you can have a mixer on stage or near the stage that can be controlled remotely using a tablet or some other device. And for guys like us, it was just a complete game changer. It made running your own show possible, which it wasn't necessarily before.
And it's worth saying that at the entry end of the market, Behringer has owned that too with the XR series. It's been really easy for people to get, and with a very compact and pretty darn affordable approach. And, it only has what it has in it, but it's a whole lot better than those powered mixers from, PV or whatever that had 4 outs and the amp was inside the mixer. And, it's just a whole big upgrade over that whole world.
Yeah, I mean, those served the purpose that they served at the time, but technology has moved on. Speaking about the whole stage mixer compact and especially the XR thing, a lot of people's gripes is that there is no physical visual readout. You can't see what's going on unless you have some sort of device.
Right.
That's a particular gripe that was addressed with this product because this one has a 10-inch touchscreen display and it's on a tilt, so you can actually pull it out and put it back. So that it's easier to see.
So the idea is it's when it's sitting on the floor on the stage, it's looking up at you.
Right.
You can actually look down and see the screen from standing. The Q-Pack has a similar kind of physical layout that tilts the screen back like that, but not on a hinge. It's just built that way.
Yeah, it's like it's a triangle.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Anyway,
and
it's a great design.
yeah, and I'm kind of ambivalent to it. I think it's nice to have the option, but I don't think like the X32 rack has one, but we don't really use it other than kind of quick checks of things. Like if you want to see if something's muted, you can just hit the button and twist the knob. So the touchscreen display is kind of a big selling point. The other limitations with these is typically I/O. Because of the size and the form factor. Most of them are somewhere between 8 and 16 inputs. And there are outliers. I think that PreSonus makes one that's got 32 channels.
Yeah, my Soundcraft has 24.
Yep. So Behringer coming in with the 24 combi inputs is a big win.
The thing that I've been concerned about with I/O all along, and part of why I went to the Soundcraft, is not the inputs so much as the outputs. So I need to put out in-ear mixes. I drive a sub off aux, so that's one taken up. And I'm not going to use 24 inputs almost ever, but boy, I'd really love to have like a dozen outs that really make my life good.
It's interesting because the physical outputs on the back it's 8 outputs. Now, when we saw it initially, I was a little, and I'm still not 100% clear on this, but I think that I know what's going on. There are 8 XLR outputs, and then below that there are 4 stereo headphone outs.
Right.
Now, my impression was that they were separate from the 8 outputs. I don't think that's the case necessarily, though.
Really? Okay.
I haven't had a chance to get into the actual like manual part of it, so that may not be the case. But my understanding is that the 8 outputs are the 8 outputs. And if you wanted to get additional outs, you would need some additional hardware. Now, the cool thing about that, though, is that the Wing Rack has 3 different AES outputs as well as a StageConnect output. And depending on the way that it's configured, it can do like 300 plus inputs and 300 plus outputs.
Yeah, it's got enough channels for any possible purpose.
Yeah.
The other thing I didn't quite understand is how they're counting all those channels as stereo.
So I went through the video.
Okay.
And the thing about the Wing, it's kind of a double-edged sword because it is super flexible routing wise, but it's kind of the lack of structure. Sometimes you can have too many options. And I think that for people who are not familiar with digital mixer layouts and that kind of thing, that can get really confusing. So any channel can be mono or stereo, but the way that that's configured doesn't necessarily impact the physical ports on the back of the thing. So let's say you wanted channel 13 to be stereo. You can configure it so on the app and whatever you're using to run the mix, there's only one fader for channel 13 and it controls the left-right component of that input. But it would still require the physical inputs of channels 13 and 14.
Yeah.
And the way that you kind of have to separate that is that the ports on the back are not channel inputs, they are physical inputs.
And then we map them in a routing structure somehow. There's a grid that does all that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm familiar with that from well, both the XR series and the Soundcraft. In both of those, there's a way to say, take a pair of input channels and join them as hard panned stereo channels. And it just links the fader. So you're moving them all at once.
The XRG is like that too.
Yeah. So this is maybe an evolution of that concept that gives you even more flexibility.
And to me, the big win is with the StageConnect stuff, because AES is fantastic. It is it's a pretty standardized protocol currently, but the hardware tends to be expensive. Digital snakes are anywhere from like $600 to like 20 grand.
Yeah.
Where the StageConnect thing allows you to use it's an XLR connection, but it's more or less like a DMX cable. So it's like a high resistance connection. But you can do up to, I think, 32 ins, 32 outs through that one stage connection, and you can link them together.
Well, that's good. I think that one of the things about this form factor, and I'm interested in your take on it, because it's the sheer, it's the same as yours and not the same as mine. Inputs on the back seem really awkward to me. I mean, I've got my Soundcraft and it's a half depth unit, and I've got it in a full depth rack, so I got some storage space behind it. But I wouldn't want to have to dig in behind there and be plugging in the dark inside the back of the rack all the time. How do you address that?
So in our situation, I've got a front panel analog split already in the rig.
Right.
So all of our stuff is coming through that. And it serves two functions, of course, because then I can use it to fan out. We used that analog split at that gig yesterday so that we could patch into their system. So there are workarounds for that kind of thing. Even if you just took the connections from the back of the rig and put them with like Neutrik connections on a panel on the back of it, that's another way that you can kind of manage that. There's a bunch of different ways to skin the cat. Yeah. The thing that I like the most about that, though, is with that StageConnect option, I can now take my inputs and put them in one rack, and then I can take my outputs or my RF and I can put them in a separate rack.
Yeah.
So I can now take
with one cable going between
one cable.
Yeah, that's
beautiful. That's the other thing is that before this you would have to use multi-pin or some other physical plugs, whereas now you literally have one connection. It goes out and you plug it in, and it links up perfectly. It's an analog line level output, which is perfect for the kind of things that we need it for. So I was saying we were in the process of changing this build out for our racks. This kind of simplifies and complicates the situation simultaneously. The one thing that I am really excited about, though, is the number of inputs, because up till now we went from Ableton with the multiple outs, and then we realized that if we're using live drums, we can't really do that. So we went back to Band Helper with just the stereo mix. But with something like this,
playback, you mean the playback mix, yeah,
right. So I've got that Play Audio 12, which has literally been sitting on a desk for the past year at this point. Well, now I have the physical outputs where I can literally patch it in, and it doesn't require a whole bunch of finagling to get it from the computer into the mixer, because we tried it using USB, like a direct USB connection to the laptop. We tried using the interface, and it's just like, this makes that a lot easier and a lot less complicated.
Now, there is also the fact of the Wings being an interface. It's got
48 in, 48 out.
Yeah. So you could probably play it off a computer direct in through that if you wanted to.
We've done that before, and it's a little squirrely because, again, you don't have the opportunity to build up any redundancy. Where the Play Audio 12 lets you link to Ableton installs and run them, and if one fails, it'll spill over automatically and that kind of thing. So we've done it a lot of different ways. This feels less finicky, I guess, because you got physical connections.
Yeah,
so
that's good.
Taking it out of like the situation that we're in currently, like there's also this entire new option of these really nice digital effects that are built into the Wing.
Right.
So you've got compressors and EQs and stuff that's modeled after SSLs and Neves and Pultecs and Empirical Labs. Like, you can put a distressor on anything. It has pitch correction, which you can, that's pretty rad. Yep. So it's a huge jump up as far as potential sound quality.
Yes.
And we've been sitting here and we're talking about all these features and stuff. We haven't even talked about how much it costs.
That's right.
During the pandemic, pricing on everything went up, but the pricing on the Behringer stuff went up considerably. Like, there was a period of time where the X32 rack cost more, like within the past 12 months, than it was when I bought it back in 2015. Now we saw this thing where, like, all of a sudden all the existing Behringer stuff dropped in price pretty drastically. So now the Wing rack is retailing for $15.99, which, like I said, up until a couple of months ago, that was just about what the X32 rack was selling for.
Yeah.
And just so much more.
The Soundcraft is, pulling from memory here, but something in the 1,200 range. So, boy, that is a darn good price.
It's a lot of mixer for the money. And, I've heard, trust me, I've heard from all kinds of people about being stoked about this. people who think that Behringer makes crap, and that's a fair critique. There have been times where
it's out of date. That
critique's
out of date. That critique is out of date. Behringer does not make crap anymore.
And then people saying, "Oh, well, there are better options." Like, sure, if you bought a Digico, it would sound better, but it's also not 50 grand, you know?
Right. Yeah, I've been looking at the Q series. The Q pack looks great. Or looked great until this week, and now it looks less great. I'm not really in the market to upgrade. Hadn't been. Man, this is quite a piece of kit.
And I think that I'm probably going to pull the trigger on this, if nothing else, just to pre-order one. Because if you go to Sweetwater's website and you qualify, I think it's 6-month financing. It's like $260 a month. That seems like a pretty easy sell.
Yeah, it does. It does. Oh, you're making it really hard for me here.
I'm sorry. I'm not
trying. I'm really trying to resist. But I don't know that I'll be able to. The thing is, though, of course, I'm going to need, like I say, those 8 outputs aren't enough. So I'm going to need some additional hardware and then figure out how to rack all of that. And then, it just opens a whole can of worms that is, of course, it presents me a problem that I absolutely love solving. It's one of my favorite things. So I'm mad and not at the same time about it. Yeah, it's pretty exciting.
The other thing about the StageConnect that we were talking about is that those are very affordable units. You're talking about $280 for one of those to get either 16 in, 16 outs, or 8 and 8. So it's a pretty.
Would it mount in the back of the rack behind the unit?
It sure could.
All right, now you're talking.
The way that I was thinking about doing it was taking the StageConnect from the one rack and putting it, backwards mounted onto the back of the RF rack.
Right.
And then just, patching them in from the back. So nice and clean up front. Just a single XLR connection. That's all you need.
All right. Okay. All right. We'll see. All right. We'll see.
Yep. I'm really curious how many of those end up landing in the Patreon group.
Yeah.
It's going to be a few of us.
Yeah. Might be both of us.
Yeah, for sure.